Hi, my name is Maiko Schaffrath. I'm the host of Impact Hustlers, a podcast featuring entrepreneurs solving the world's biggest problems. Before I started working with podcast publishing, I was editing everything myself. I did the whole organization around the podcast, including getting guests on the show, promoting the podcast, doing proper marketing of the podcast, everything myself, and had to edit every week, basically, my episodes. I just couldn't keep up with it, which led me actually to publish episodes only once a month. So that was one of my main issues where I was looking for support with editing and marketing the podcast. So initially I was just looking for somebody's support with editing the podcast, but working with podcast publishing has been so much more. It's been really getting a proper producer on board that gives input on even guests, helps editing obviously, but then also publishing it to all the available podcast platforms, marketing the podcast, distributing it to social media, so much more, and it's really helped get the podcast to a wider audience. Before, I was struggling really with consistency. Really being able to publish podcasts on a weekly basis requires a lot of effort. And since working with podcast publishing, I was actually able to turn to a weekly basis, get more shows out there and focus on what I'm truly good at, which is interviewing people and reaching out to new entrepreneurs. So that's what I like to do, and I can focus on that now. That's very good. Working with podcast publishing is really straightforward. All I do is once I record a podcast, I drop it into a Google Drive, and I know for certain it's going to be published according to our schedule. I don't really need to intervene. I don't need to really listen to them. I can just trust podcast publishing to do all that. It's very straightforward and very convenient for me. So I chose to work with podcast publishing not just because the service is very reliable and just gets me what I need, but also because Woon is really entrepreneurial and tries to understand the goal of the podcast, and is not just somebody that edits my podcast and then dumps it with me, but really thinks through how to elevate the show to the next level. And it's great to have somebody at our side that thinks about the bigger picture rather than just helping with very small elements of the podcast. So that's great to have, and it's great to have a proper producer on board with Woon. If you're hosting a podcast, if you might be editing yourself or promoting it yourself, I really recommend hiring podcast publishing. You'll get a tremendous amount of support, and it will just free up your mind to push your podcast to the next level. You will be able to focus on what you're truly good at, and that's why I recommend working with them. It's been a great time so far, and we have a lot of plans still going forward, so I'm looking forward to that. I highly recommend podcast publishing.